On Andy Abramson, happy Tuesday afternoon. Hope you're doing well. Hope you're having a great week. Man, just it's crazy. We are already into October, which we're on the home stretch of 2022, which is pretty wild to think about that we're wrapping up a new year. We're going to be heading into 2023. Man, lots of crazy stuff, good stuff happening. So wanted to jump on for just a couple minutes today, tomorrow, Wednesday, and then the following day on Thursday as well. Here's the purpose of our time here together is I want to bring you into some conversations that we've been having over the last several months as a way of just kind of adding some value and helping you progress wherever you're at in your ministry. Most of you know that we started this last beginning of last summer a brand new space where we're calling it our Elementum family, which in essence is our same coaching process that we do with people. We're slotting them into a stage of ministry, doing some online coaching, some group coaching calls. But one of the things we're doing is we're adding in a quarterly gathering where leaders are in community together working on their ministry. And so we had our first one in the end of June, and then we had our second one here last week. So we had leaders coming in from around Texas and from North Carolina last week. And so it's really fun. In fact, several of you have been on calls with us talking about this environment, whether it makes sense to you. But what I'm trying to do is I want to take some of the conversations and kind of export them into our Facebook group here to kind of help you process through. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about a concept here today called upper room, lower room, which we've talked briefly about that in some different scenarios. Then we're going to talk about funnel fusion tomorrow on Wednesday. And then on Thursday, we're going to talk through Horizon Storyline. These are three tools that we talked about that we utilized in our 2-day quarterly gatherings here in June, and then as well last week at the end of September. And so we're going to jump in for just a couple minutes. And so here, let me kind of frame it this way. It was, in fact, I was on a call earlier this week, just kind of reflecting on the last couple of years of ministry, reflecting on ministering to college students and young adults through a pandemic, and some of the things that we discovered. And one of the things that was pretty apparent pretty quickly is that there were leaders who quickly could pivot because they understood some foundational principles, some strategies that were important for college or young adult ministry, while others that struggled were really relying on tactical things that they were going to do, whether it was the way that they did small groups or the way that they reached freshmen the first few weeks. And a lot of people struggled. And one of the things that was, I think, pretty apparent quickly for us was the ones who had a strategic understanding of disciple making, right? And could shift the tactic of what that looked like and really begin to think creatively and in a new way around what ministry needed to look like in 2020, 2021, and then for some of you in the start of 2022, even just some of the ramifications and the lingering effects that it's created. So one of the tools that we talked about back in June, kind of the frameworks that we used was this conversation around upper room and lower room. Let me do a quick, I'll do a screen share here. Let me just kind of walk through with my iPad. Hopefully will work. Awesome. There we go. Just put that over there. Sweet. So really this conversation around what we call upper room, lower room. And here's the way we kind of define it is for most ministries, there's a way in which we think about the function of ministry, right? We think about the meetings we need to have. We think about the planning that needs to be made. We think about like the systems and the processes that help us build ministry. But one of the things I think that really is a hinge in a ministry being really impactful is going to be around this idea is, do they really have a vision for disciple making at the heart of their ministry, right? So you can have like programs and functions and events and things, but really what are those things ultimately leading you towards? And for the people who have this, like really begin to have some impact in ministry, what we find is really this kind of like this thread or this heartbeat behind everything that they do, of asking the question, why are we doing this in order to help like disciple people? And so this is a framework that we use, and in this framework there's what we call the upper room, and then there's the lower room. And in the lower room, I want you to think about like the practical functions of the church. And in the book that we read, Future Church, that we utilizes a couple of these frameworks, there were what they call the 4 Ps. And the 4 Ps are really functions of the lower room, right? So here's the first one. Often what we see is part of the lower room is really about the place, the physical location or the place that you meet, right? So you think about like this, the lower room often will be entry points for why maybe initially that students or young adults will come into your ministry. And so maybe it's more of like a proximity issue, right? So maybe for some of you who are like doing campus ministry and you have a campus ministry house, or like the church is located, walking distance from the college campus or from an apartment complex. And so there's this idea of saying, okay, part of the attractiveness of why I'm going to begin initially engaging with this ministry is really around the physical location or the proximity. So that can be one reason, right? The second one is this idea of programs, right? So programs are really like um, the function of the ministry that's going on. And so for a lot of leaders, or for a lot of maybe college students or young adults, maybe it's a specific program that has drawn them into the ministry. It could be a small group, it could be maybe your midweek service or your Sunday school class. That program is the thing ultimately that draws them in. And then the next one, the third P, is personality. And personality is really around like the relationships with like the staff or key leaders in the ministry. And so maybe there's a communicator at your midweek that the students really appreciate, or they love the worship leader, or there's a small group leader. And so there's like a personality that is really the driving force of them entering and engaging initially into the ministry. And then the last one, and this is probably, I would say, is the one that's most common in collegiate and young adult ministry, is really around the people, right? So the other relationships that the other relationships that that student or young adult has. So maybe their friends go there. And so because of that, those people, there's a desire to engage or get involved in the ministry as well. And so here's the thing is all of us have some functional lower room parts of our ministry. So we think about like proximity or place, a physical location. We think about programs that we have, small groups or midweeks or Sunday school classes. Think about all of the leaders have certain personalities that draw other people to them. And then there's friend pockets, right, within our ministry that ultimately will help draw them in as well. And so what we find is these become really entry points for college students and young adults, right? So they can become really the entry point to saying, how are they going to initially engage in the ministry? Now, here's what we discovered during COVID, which I think is has been super evident, is COVID created lots of change in the lower room. Like I even think of personally at our church, like I think about the place we could no longer meet in the middle school, right? So we actually had to jump from there's like this YMCA camp outside to then the YMCA, and like we're just kind of jumping around. Or you think about like the programs change, so all of a sudden we couldn't gather in community groups, and we couldn't do midweek stuff, and we couldn't do small group stuff, and we couldn't, like, there was programs that were taken away. And personalities, there's been so much turnover in terms of like even new staff positions, or people would just kind of disperse or disband, or people would move away. I don't want to live in the state anymore. And so what we found was is a lot of shifting in the lower room, and ultimately we see what happened because of that. Ministry became very unstable. It became very like almost like you're trying to like grab water, right? You couldn't quite like grasp it. And there was like this just difficulty. And I think one of the primary things of why, I won't say the only thing, but one of the things is that I think we didn't do a great job of giving people a greater vision for what church and ministry is, right? And so there's a second part to the framework, is what we call the upper room. And the upper room is really this thing here. It's really around a vision for making disciples, right? And so it's really this idea of saying, okay, yes, we want to have lower room activities of place or programs or personality or people, but eventually what we need to do is understand that what the scriptures talk about is just us not consuming or being a part of lower room activities, but really it's catching this great commandment, great commission calling on our lives of saying, man, ministry is actually not me receiving, but actually ministry is more about me giving, right? It's more about me like contributing and investing in the lives of other people. And really what that is at the very heartbeat is this idea of a vision for disciple making, that we would have a vision for saying, man, ministry is more than just what I receive, but it needs to have this kind of outward expression. And so what we need to begin to do is actually help people move from the upper room or from the lower room into a vision of disciple making, which is really upper room. And I think that this is what I would say when we look back on the last couple of years is the ministries that had leaders and course, like the core of the ministry that really had a vision for disciple making, that even when the bottom changed or shift or shut down for a while, there was ability to like pivot or move into this really this heart of saying, how do we continue to make disciples? How do we continue to engage people? How do we continue to to really be the hands and the feet and the gospel, giving people the gospel of what Jesus has done for them, and being a part of the kingdom expanding. Now, so here's the challenge, right? So for our ministries is we need both. We need to have lower room. And this was the discussion in June. I remember specifically for probably a couple hours around this room here in Austin, was really about this idea. One is that we need both lower room and upper room, right? But secondly is the challenge that we all experience. And that was really where the discussion went, of the challenge or some of the barriers of leading people from the lower room into the upper room. And there's really kind of three stages of this. And if you've been on any of the like the past couple of webinars, maybe where we talked about disciple making, I've mentioned these. And so really this idea of like what I'm going to call like step one is really for the leader to begin to engage in the upper room, right? So in step one of saying, I mean, so if you're listening to this and you are a leader of a college or young adult ministry, you have to catch a vision for upper room ministry, and you begin to model it, you begin to engage in it, you begin to really champion this idea of upper room. So that's really the first step of saying, how do we first get, and this is even in our process of like, how do we first get the leader in the upper room. In step number 2, we want to get the team of leaders in the upper room, right? So you think about, so now we have in step 1, we have the leader that's in the upper room, but what does it look like for that leader actually to go down into the lower room and find other leaders, really, and then to invite them into the upper room? So what does it look like for your leadership to catch a vision for disciple making? Right? What does it look like for your leadership to really begin to embody what disciple making in this vision for disciple making? And then in the last one, as we talk about step number 3, is we want to get others into the upper room. So now you have the leadership, so now you got not just the primary leader here, but now all of a sudden we got a leadership team that's here. And what they're doing now is now they're going down into the lower room, right? And they're inviting people back into the upper room and giving them a vision for disciple making. And I'll tell you what, like if you could catch this and the nuances of this and the complexity of this and kind of the pieces surrounded this idea of upper room, lower room, and you begin to think through, okay, what are the lower room things we do, right? What does it look like to cast vision for the upper room? What is it like for me as a leader to be engaged in the upper room? What does it look like for our team to engage, and then ultimately to go down and find other people and invite them into a vision of the upper room? And man, so this is like a compressed conversation training here for you today. So here's my encouragement for you, is that as you continue to engage, as you continue to think about this idea of like ministry and the development of your ministry, what does it look like for you, your leaders, and ultimately your ministry as a whole to move below the lower room and give people a vision for an upper room of making disciples? Yeah, so that's what I got for you today. If you have any questions, go ahead and you can just kind of throw them in the chat. I'll loop back around at some point here and answer some of those questions. Would love to kind of hear some of your thoughts, some of your feedback, some of your things that stood out to you along the way. So, man, just it was an incredible conversation. Wanted to share that with you here today. Hope is beneficial for you and your ministry. And man, we'll jump in tomorrow. We're gonna the next part, the next framework that we talked about actually this last week was this idea of funnel fusion. And it's this idea of taking 2 different types of things in your ministry, what we call a simulation funnel, but also this multiplication funnel, and how you marry those things together as well. And so we'll talk about that a bit tomorrow. And then we'll talk about Horizon Storyline on Thursday as well. Okay, so drop any questions you have in the comments. I'll loop back around at some point. We'd love to hear what stood out to you. If you're ever interested in joining us on these quarterly gatherings in Austin, you can reach out to me and we can talk a little bit more about that and see if that works for you. Okay, that's it. We'll see you tomorrow. See you on Wednesday. Okay, talk to you later. Bye.